Well, losing income, it kind of runs the little red wagon off the trail and kind of sets it on fire, right?
Yeah.
And there's the finality of losing your job and the security that goes along with that and the hope of the next the next few paychecks and I'm sure your wife and I'm sure men's families, they're fearful, they're scared, they don't, unless your spouse works and brings in an income as well. But most families in America have two income families.
Yep.
It requires two incomes for them to survive, to put food on the table, pay the living expenses, hopefully get ahead a little bit, uh, save for vacation, save for retirement, whatever it is that you're doing with your money. But and so a lot of that fear and angst and anxiety from the family kind of reflects back on you, right? And you want to stay strong, you want to be strong, you want to put on a not necessarily a good front, but you don't want to show when they're weak, you need to be strong, right? And so
Yeah.
how do you do that for your family? How do you remain strong, but at the same time dealing with the identity crisis and the fear that you're battling?
Yeah. And a lot of these people, when you lose a spouse, okay, fortunately, I don't have that experience, but I know people who have, and I've seen the devastation after that, not just emotionally, but financially. Like you say, most families today, not a lot of them, most of them probably have a two-family income. And when you lose half that income and you're dealing with a loss and you still have a family to keep going, that is devastating. And if you start making mistakes now because of that situation, it just compounds the problem. It really does compound it. And I've seen people suffer too much. That's why when I made my compass, I made it simple. I made it non-financial tech type thing and more like just for the average person. And we have there's 9 steps on it, and wherever you're at, you just look where you're at, and then you go from there, and you take one step forward from where you're at. And it's just very simple because with that kind of loss, it's the worst thing to do is now compound it with financial pain. You got the emotional pain, but now let's compound it with no. We don't want to compound it with financial pain. We really don't.
So at some point, a man realizes he has to build from the inside out. What does the first honest step usually look like? What was your first honest step?
Well, the first honest step was recognizing I blew it. And I'm not saying everyone's this way, okay, but for me, I'm going to speak for me. I blew it for 40 years. I mean, I knew how to make money, but I didn't know how to build wealth. Those are two different separate skill sets. And I was pretty good at one, but lousy at the other one. And I had to be honest with myself. I have to do it differently. If I keep doing it like I'm doing, just making more money isn't going to solve anything because we're still going to end up on a cliff at the end of it. And so I think being honest with yourself is the first step. And then for me, financially, and again, I'm talking from a financial standpoint, is this is the actual one-page compass, so I'm going to give to all your listeners for free. There's nothing, I'm not here to sell you nothing or anything like that. But basically, these are the 9 steps, and you just figure out where you're at in these 9 steps, and you just pick up from there. You don't have to, knowing where you're at is half the battle, and then knowing how to get to the next step is the other half of the battle. And sometimes when you're emotional or when you just don't know, you can go in circles like those people in that example and I did for 40 years, and that's what you don't want to be doing, going in circles.
Right. Hello and welcome to Father's Refuge podcast. My name is James Moffat and I'll be your host. Today on the Father's Refuge, we're joined by David. David, how do you say your last name?
Nassif.
Nassif. David Nassif, a man whose story carries both the weight of loss and the quiet strength that comes from walking through it. David has lived the kind of pain many men never talk about, and he's learned how to turn that pain into compassion, clarity, and a steady hope for others. His journey speaks directly to fathers who feel broken, alone, or unsure how to take the next step. I'm honored to welcome him into the space as we talk about grief, rebuilding, and the kind of hope that meets a man right where he is. David, thank you for being on the podcast today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah, my name is David Nassif, as you mentioned, and I never planned on being an author. I really never planned on going on a podcast in my life, although I do enjoy listening to them. But something happened to me that was kind of life transforming, and it happened when I was 63, and I just got fired after 18 years with the same company. I tell you, that is a day I would not wish on anybody. I did the math, and it was brutal. If we drained all of our savings and all of our retirement, we'd be broke by 65. And at this point, I'm thinking, who is going to hire me at my age? But James, that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was driving home. I'm thinking, how am I going to tell my wife Mary? We had been married at that point for 30 years. She did not deserve the mess I just threw our family into. So after 2 months of dead-end job searching, 'cause I'm going to be honest with you, my heart wasn't in it. The thought of going back to the corporate world just made me sick to my stomach. But the thing is, what was I going to do? I needed money. I only had a short runway. And so, anyways, after 2 months of dead end job searching, I finally decided to take a huge risk. And I went to work as an independent sales agent on straight commission. No salary, no safety net, no benefits. The first months were brutal. It was constant cold calls, constant rejection, rookie mistakes. I don't think I ever heard so many no's in my life in a 1 or 2 month period of time. But James, it's funny. All that resistance I was getting through that rejection, I really believe, looking back, I can reflect on it now. I think it was the mental muscle. It helped me build the mental muscles I needed to punch through that dark moment, that time that I just felt like I was lost. So, anyways, after 10 months of grinding, I hit an incredible milestone. I was suddenly making more money than my good paying 6-figure corporate salary. And I thought, oh my gosh, we made it. But then I realized we didn't make nothing. I've been making good money most of my life. And the problem wasn't making good money. The problem for me was investing it and building wealth. I just was terrible at it. I mean, after 40 years, you'd think I'd have had a huge nest egg, and I got nothing. So I decided I can't waste my time with a bunch of investment theories. I dug down and read 21 books, listened to 13 podcasts faithfully on financial planning, read blogs and newsletters. Every time I got a good idea, I put it on this one piece of paper. I distilled everything down to this one piece of paper. And I made a kind of a set it and forget it approach because I had to run my company. I couldn't be looking at Wall Street and looking at the market and all that kind of thing. And so, anyways, 6 years later, at age 69, I hit what I thought was impossible. From terrified of being broke to a 7-figure portfolio and real financial freedom. James, I now know it is never too late to rewrite your story. Because if I can pull that off starting as late as 63, I know anyone can with the right direction.
Okay. Well, it's very interesting. So, Father's Refuge is about loss and grief, and the podcast is about loss and grief, and it's here for men who have lost a wife or a child to some sort of cancer, illness, car wreck, whatever it might be. So I started this out because in 2001 we lost our daughter Jessica, who was 10 years old, to cancer.
Sorry.
And there was no support back then for fathers that were dealing with loss and grief. Fast forward to 6 months ago, I was talking to somebody on another podcast. And they said, "Hey, James, you ought to start a podcast. You've got a story to tell." And I'm like, oh, that was like an epiphany. I was like, why didn't I even think of that? So I started it. And podcasting is very dynamic in that you're constantly learning how to adapt to the audience, to adapt to the podcasting network and podcasting in general. You're learning how to do things better. And you're learning, I learned that I want to change the scope for the podcast and be a little more inclusive of family members that are experiencing loss and grief. And obviously, when you lose a job like that, I worked for Wyndham Vacation Rentals from 2008 to 2018, and at that time I was in my 50s. They let me go, and I was like, I thought that was going to be my last job as an adult, right? I was just going to ride the gravy train and retire. And so in 2018, I found myself, 55 years of age or whatever, and I'm considered a senior, and it's like nobody wanted to hire me. And I was like, I was hard pressed to find another IT job. And I've got 30 years of experience in IT. And then they were like, I kept hearing from recruiters and hiring managers, "I'm sorry, while you have an impressive background, we've decided to go with another candidate." Well, what does that tell you? It tells you that you're just too old. They're not going to come out and tell you that. But if you have, all these certifications and degrees and 30 years of experience, you're more than qualified for most of the jobs, if not overqualified. So anyway, when somebody loses a career like that, there's loss assigned to it or associated with that, and grief. And so it's interesting that you are telling us about your story, because I know that there are men that are listening to this podcast that have experienced that at some point in their life, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about that as well. So, when a man loses his job, it hits deeper than finances. In your experience, what does that moment feel like on the inside?
It's a combination of terrifying, loss, certainty. I remember, I'm the kind of person when my head hits the pillow, James, I'm asleep. I'm asleep for the night. But I remember waking up in the middle of the night saying, "Wait a minute, we still got all these bills going out." The electric company didn't say, "Hey, we're going to give you a break because you got laid off." No, I didn't get laid off; I got fired. Okay. Oh, we're going to give you a break on the water bill. No, no, no. They were all barreling at us, and I had no money coming in, zero money coming in, and that is such a frightening experience. I remember my wife, just talk about the pain of the whole thing. My wife, she asked me to go shopping with her in like a Wednesday afternoon morning because there was a big sale and she wanted to conserve money because we only had a 2-year one, right? And it was even getting shorter. And so I went with her to help out because I had nothing else to do. I was sitting on my resume, but getting nowhere. And then I remember I went in the store, and I know this isn't probably accurate, but I felt like I was the only man in the whole store. It was the mothers and babies in their carts. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing here on a Wednesday late morning? I should be out earning a living, providing for my family. And I remember Mary was checking out, and I'm at the end of the counter waiting. And I felt like I had a sign on me, the biggest loser. I just felt like I wanted to scream. I wanted to break out, but where was I to break out to? When I interviewed with people like you're saying, James, they were very polite, but it's like I could almost read their minds. We could hire someone half your age for a third of the cost that you are,
Sure,
buddy. And
absolutely.
I remember they're saying, "So what kind of ingenuity or forward thinking could you bring to the company?" Saying like, "What could a 63-year-old bring?" It was almost like it was a negative. My age and my experience were all negatives, and it's like, what is happening here? It was very traumatic for me.
I think that for men, um, and you've noticed this, I'm sure, um, you'll go to a party or you go to a social event, and somebody will inevitably ask, "Well, who are you? What do you do?" And what do men typically fall back on? And even women, we tell them
Yeah,
what we do for a living. Well, I'm an IT specialist, or I'm a salesman, or I work at the bank, or I'm this, or I'm that. Well, that's a very it's a large part of who we are. Definitely, it helps pay our bills and provides for our families. That's not really who we are. That shouldn't be our identity. I'm James Moffett and you're David Nassif, and there's more to us than a paycheck. But we get so wrapped up and involved in the 9 to 5 or 7 to 3:30 like I work, and we get so wrapped up in the daily grind, and our companies that we work for kind of become our identity. Oh, I work for Boeing, or I work for the VA, or I work for General Electric, or whoever. And you're like, because that kind of validates who we are, right? It gives us value. But in essence, that's not who we are. That's not our identity. But when you get cut off at the knees and HR is telling you, "Hey, you've been working for us for so long, you've done a wonderful job, but we no longer need you. And today's your last day." And you take your cardboard box
yeah,
and
that's
you
funny.
and you fill it full of all your personal crap, and you walk out the door and you get in your car and you go, "Well, what the hell am I gonna do now? What am I gonna do?" I was shocked. Because it came out of left field. I was not expecting it
I
because
do.
I was a regional IT manager and I serviced 5 different locations in the Low Country, and they didn't. I was it. I was a one man show, and I thought, well, surely they're not going to do anything to my position. And Wyndham Vacation Rentals was going through a reorg, which is ultimately what killed my spot. And so yeah, so I know that I know that I know that there are men out there that have, you know, received, either been fired or laid off and received some sort of severance package, and they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, what do I do next?
Yeah.
And of course, most of us, unless you have a big fat nest egg, you got creditors looking at you. They want the water bill paid, they want the light bill paid, the car payments coming due, the mortgages coming due, the rent's coming due, credit cards want money. Everybody wants money, and they do not care what the problem is. All they want to know is on the due date that they can reach into your checking account and take the money out that you owe them.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of men don't talk about the embarrassment, fear, or anger that comes with job loss. What emotions do you see men wrestling with the most?
I think pride is one of them for me, but I quickly got rid of the pride thing because I had to go to survival mode. It's like, wait a minute, okay, I don't have time to be proud right now. I really need to get some money
Right,
coming in here. And again,
right.
if I had a couple $1 million nest egg for retirement, a lot of people do, I wouldn't have to worry. But I didn't. Like I said, I had 2 years or less, and it's like, okay, no time for pride. I have to put it up. Can I just mention briefly this? I heard something about when this happened, and it kind of got me on the whole track of getting on this straight plan instead of going in circles. Let me just share this. A scientist at the Max Planck Institute did an experiment. What they did is they placed people in the center of a dense German forest, and they told them to walk in a straight line to the edge. And these are confident, capable people. But when the clouds covered the sun, the GPS tracking showed they were gradually starting to walk in circular motions. Some of them were ending up right back where they began. But every single one of them was absolutely convinced they were walking a perfectly straight line the whole time. That was me, James, for 40 years. I was working hard, making decent money, thought I was doing the right thing and with money and all that kind of thing, but ultimately I was just going in a total circle. And that's where I ended up. And I says, I can't do this anymore when this happened. I says, I have got to get on a plan that gets me going in one direction because I'm done with making mistakes. I can't do it anymore. And that's why I came up with a compass that got me, that kind of put the emotions aside. And when I started making money, it was like, okay, I can do this now. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a little ways down there, but I can see it.
Right. So let me ask you this. So you just told us that, or told me, or us, yeah, it'll be us at some point. You told us that you kind of shook off all the pride and all the emotions that comes along with the loss of identity, the loss of a job, loss of a paycheck. How exactly did you do that?
Well, basically, when I got this, I'll tell you, when I tell you that I started my own company or sales agency, it was worse than it sounds because I had failed twice in my 40s trying to start a company, and so I thought, oh, okay, I guess I'm just not the entrepreneurial type. I'll just have to work for a company, which is fine. I can handle it. So when I decided, because no one was going to hire me, when I decided I have to start my own company, it was a lot of concern because I tried it. One of the failures put me into serious six-figure debt that took years to pay off. So, I mean, it was like there's emotional scars there. But here's the thing I understood, James, that I learned lessons from those failures. I learned things that I didn't know then that I know now. And so, although I'm 63 now, a lot older, I am smarter because I understand what now to avoid and what not to avoid. And when I started digging in and really started going for it, I just didn't have time to feel sorry for myself or to blame other people or to get proud. I had to dig in there and really focus. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, pray like everything depends on God, then get up and work like everything depends on you. That's all I was doing for that 10-month period, working and praying, working and praying, working and praying. And I just had to, I was in survival mode. And I really, I'm not saying I didn't have emotions. I obviously had emotions, but the pride part, I just had to throw that to the curb. I didn't have time for that. I mean, it wasn't an easy 10 months. It was very difficult. And there was up and down emotions the whole time. But when you have, I think, a target, when you have an objective, which is survival, and this is the means you're going to do it. Because I had no plan B. There was no backup plan to this. If I didn't do this, then I curl up and I don't know what's going to happen. And so that helped a lot. It sounds weird. Why did that help? Because it kept me focused, and I just didn't have time for a lot of emotions that if I was sitting at home watching TV and feeling sorry for myself or whatever, they would have probably erupted a lot more. But I had to push them out to get this done. If that makes sense.
Right. So you found a new purpose or a new
Yeah,
identity in what you were doing and why you were doing it. And so that helped you deal with the loss and the grief ultimately.
exactly. Exactly.
So there's this pressure to stay strong for the family, even when you feel lost. How have you seen that pressure affect men during the season?
Well, I suppose different men differently. I only can speak from what I've experienced, and for me, it was kind of a motivating factor. I wasn't going to my wife of 30 years, I was not going to allow her to end our life in misery in the last how many more decades or whatever we had left. I just wasn't going to do it. It wasn't fair to her. I just felt like I just felt a moral and responsibility. I have to figure this out, and that was really a driving force. And maybe if I was single and if I had more money, I would have, things would have just not even. I don't know what would happen, but because of her, and she believed in me so much. She believed in me more than I did. I mean, when I came home and told her that, she was, "Honey, I know you're going to turn this around. I don't know how, but I believe in you. I know you can do it." But James, I have to be honest. I known her for 30 years at that point, and I looked into her eyes and I could see concern, which broke my heart. I mean, it's like I could see concern,
Sure.
but she was putting on a strong front for me, and I know she believed it, but she was still concerned. I mean, 63. This is like pretty serious. So I think my wife was a big factor in my saying, I cannot fail. That's not an option. It's just not an option. And I'll do whatever it takes to, within moral and legal and ethical, ways to make it work right.
Well, losing income, it kind of runs the little red wagon off the trail and kind of sets it on fire, right?
Yeah.
And there's there's the finality of losing your job and the security that goes along with that and the hope of the next, the next few paychecks. And I'm sure your wife and I'm sure men's families, they're fearful, they're scared, they don't, unless your spouse works and brings in an income as well. But most families in America have two income families.
Yep.
It requires two incomes for them to survive, to put food on the table, pay the living expenses, hopefully get ahead a little bit, save for vacation, save for retirement, whatever it is that you're doing with your money. But, and so a lot of that fear and angst and anxiety from the family kind of reflects back on you, right? And you want to stay strong, you want to be strong, you want to put on a not necessarily a good front, but you don't want to show when they're weak, you need to be strong, right? And so
Yep.
how do you do that for your family? How do you remain strong, but at the same time dealing with the identity crisis and the fear that you're battling?
Yeah. And a lot of these people, when you lose a spouse, unfortunately, I don't have that experience, but I know people who have, and I've seen the devastation after that, not just emotionally, but financially. Like you say, a lot of most families today, not a lot of them, most of them probably have a two-family income. And when you lose half that income and you're dealing with a loss and you still have a family to keep going, that is devastating. And if you start making mistakes now because of that situation, it just compounds the problem. It really does compound it. And I've seen people suffer too much. That's why when I made my compass, I made it simple. I made it non-financial tech type thing and more like just for the average person. And we there's 9 steps on it. And wherever you're at, you just look where you're at and then you go from there and you take one step forward from where you're at. And that's it's just very simple because with that kind of loss, it's the worst thing to do is now compound it with financial pain. You got the emotional pain, but now let's compound it with no, we don't want to compound it with financial pain. We really don't.
So at some point, a man realizes he has to build from the inside out. What does the first honest step usually look like? What was your first honest step?
Well, first honest step was recognizing I blew it and I'm not saying everyone's this way, okay, but for me, I'm going to speak for me. I blew it for 40 years. I mean, I knew how to make money, but I didn't know how to build wealth. Those are two different separate skill sets. And I was pretty good at one, lousy at the other one. And I had to be honest with myself. I have to do it differently. If I keep doing it like I'm doing, just making more money isn't going to solve anything because we're still going to end up on a cliff at the end of it. And so I think being honest with yourself is the first step. And then for me, financially, and again, I'm talking from a financial standpoint, is this is the actual one-page compass, so I'm going to give to all your listeners for free. There's nothing. I'm not here to sell you nothing or anything like that. But basically, these are the 9 steps, and you just figure out where you're at in these 9 steps, and you just pick up from there. You don't have to, you know, knowing where you're at is half the battle, and then knowing how to get to the next step is the other half of the battle. And sometimes when you're emotional or when you just don't know, you can go in circles, like those people in that example, and I did for 40 years, and that's what you don't want to be doing, going in circles.
Right. So, practically speaking, what small routines or habits help a man regain momentum and confidence after everything feels disrupted?
Well, when it comes to, again, I'm speaking from a financial standpoint, when that becomes disrupted, either because of a loss of a job or of a spouse, and the result of it is, I think the one thing one thing I say to do is take 2 minutes a week, and I actually have it on my calendar at 4 o'clock on Fridays. I do this every 4 o'clock on Fridays. I take 2 minutes a week And I look at the 30,000-foot view of where I'm at and say, okay, am I going in the right direction or am I going off side, that kind of thing? And that's what the compass is designed to do, is to give you that executive level 30,000-foot view. Am I going, if I had only done this 40 years ago, oh my gosh, my life would be so much different. I wouldn't have gone in circles for 40 years financially. If I could just see the 30,000-foot view, where do I want to go, where I'm at now, and see that would make a big difference, to just have like a little personal meeting with yourself. And if you have something like a compass, like I'm showing you, then you have a tangible thing to say, okay, here's where I'm at, and I need to get to the next step. So what do I got to do? And that's where, and again, I'm not trying to sell a book, but that's when the book comes in. It's basically, if you get the step, you're at a step and you're stuck, or you need help with that step, it says right in here, chapter 3 or 5 or whatever the step is, and you just go to it. And this is like your ground game, your map, like take a right here, take a left here. And even when you have a lot of emotions, it's just nice to have practical step-by-step way to give me the recipe, will you? So I could just follow it. I really don't have time to either reinvent the wheel or get all off track. And that's where I would do anyways.
So men tend to isolate when they're hurting. What changes when a man lets even one or two trusted people into the struggle?
Well, it does change a lot for me, anyways. I mean, my wife was a big part of it, and she was very good. I have a couple good friends that were very supportive, and it's nice. Even if you just have one person to talk to, I think it makes a big difference, you know. And then I had my faith. I mean, I don't know. I'm just being honest with you. I mean, my faith was a big factor. I don't think I would have made it if it wasn't for my faith and my and answer to prayers that, but I looking back here, let me just say one thing. I've heard this saying once, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Someone was in a dark, dark time in their life, and they prayed, and they says, "Lord, please relieve me from this burden, help me free from it." And the impression they got in their mind was, "I love you too much to deny you of this experience." And looking back, I tell you, I wanted out of that situation so bad, with the nightmare of no job and all that kind of thing. But looking back now, I needed to go through that. And I needed to go through that financial nightmare. So I came out much stronger than I ever have. My life is much better than it's ever been. And I don't think I would have. I think I needed that. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for other people, like losing a spouse. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just talking finance here now. I mean, but sometimes we have to go through the tough times to get stronger, I think, in a way.
So your story illuminates the fact that you, for 40 years or whatever, that you were doing the grind and, the 9 to 5, and you were making money, and like all of us,
Yeah.
making money, paying
Yeah.
bills, trying to
Yeah.
put some aside.
Yeah.
And when you lost your job, which is what produces the loss and the grief, when you lost your job, which was kind of your security blanket, right? All of a sudden you had an epiphany, or you were forced to recognize that you had a bigger problem,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
you recognize the fact that you couldn't continue down the road doing the same thing. And it's like there's what's the story it says? What's the definition of insanity? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing every day, the same way, over and over and over again without making any changes. It's like if you don't like your life, change it. Make tiny changes, like Denzel Washington says in his Equalizer movies. If you don't like your life, make a change. Change it. Progress, not perfection. So set your goal, which kind of what you've been saying,
Yeah.
is you set a goal.
Yeah.
What's your goal? Your goal is when you're 85 or 90 years old or whatever, 70, 75, none of us know how long we're going to live, but at some point you're going to get tired of working,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
don't care how much money you're making now.
That's right.
At some point you're going to go, I want to retire and enjoy life. But before you can do that, you need a little nest egg. You need to be able to have retirement money that you can look at and go, okay, so we have X amount of money in 401s, IRAs, whatever it might be. So you look at that and you go, you divide however many years of life you have left, 10, 20 years. How much will it take us to live if I live another 10 or 20 years? And you have the equation, right? And so that's the goal that you're looking for. And what you're saying is that you've made some subtle changes, or maybe even some drastic changes, to reach a different goal. Like your goal is not to work 9 to 5 to earn a paycheck and barely get along, right? Your
Right.
goal is to be able to build wealth, which I think, who amongst us doesn't need to learn that, right? I'm sorry, fathers, I know this podcast normally talks about the emotional toil of losing a loved one, and in that there's, we're not discounting that or making light of that. But how many of us men who are the leaders of our families, husbands of wives, fathers to children, and we're responsible for leadership in our homes, and we're responsible for providing for our families as best
Yeah.
as we can.
Yeah.
And so, and how many of us have financial stress? I have financial stress, and I bet a lot of people listening to this podcast have financial stress because of circumstances outside of their control, like losing a job, right? Or making silly mistakes and missteps along the way. I've made plenty of those. I I'm not a financial counselor, but I can tell you one thing: I'm an expert on what not to do. I'm an expert at doing it. Hindsight's 2020, and I can tell you exactly financially what not to do. And I may not know what to do to turn it around, but I know what not to do. So I can tell them what not to do. You can tell them what to do with your book and your plan, right? So I think that's a good thing, and I think that families uh, experience challenges and stress because there's more bills than there is paycheck. And my wife and I are in our 60s. My wife's 66. I'm 64. Turned 65 in November. We didn't plan for retirement, so we're going to have to work until we can't work anymore. And I've got Social Security benefits that are there to help, you know, and so that's a little bit of a safety net that I can fall back on. But I probably need to figure out how to build wealth too. This is something that I
We
can
all do.
use.
We all do.
Sure, absolutely. Whether you're selling peanut butter 24 hours on the weekend or whatever, we need to figure out how to get beyond the 9 to 5 grind.
Yep. And can I mention one more thing, James, because it's important.
Sure.
When you have a traumatic loss, like I can't even comprehend about losing a spouse, a loved one, or a child or whatever, what I would like to avoid is having another traumatic problem down the road. And I just like to share with your listeners, because this is real stuff. And if they understand it, maybe they'll say, wait a minute, maybe I need to take this a little more serious than I have. This is from the National Council on Aging. 80% of older adults are facing financial insecurity. I didn't say 10%, I'm saying 80%. That's the majority of
Wow.
senior citizens.
Yep.
49.6% of people 60 plus do not have sufficient income for their basic needs. I'm talking housing, food, and healthcare. That's half the senior population. Another one, older adults. The bottom 20% of the wealth chart, whatever, they die 9 years earlier than the top. So we're not just talking about money now and pain. We're talking about actual people lost. And here's this last line. Cause of gut-wrenching stress for seniors, the number one fear is the fear of running out of money due to little savings and investments for retirements. This is most people work 40 years and they're good people and they were loyal employees to their employer. But the problem was they didn't have a plan and they made other people wealthy, but they didn't make themselves wealthy. And that's what I'm trying to make people aware of is don't wait till you're in your 60s. If you're in your 30s and 40s, oh my gosh, you've got an opportunity here. Don't head for another traumatic experience. I know people literally who had to make decisions between medicine and food or medicine and rent. And it just tears you up. I mean, to see that. And they take that to their grave. It doesn't turn around when you're 78. It just doesn't suddenly magically turn around. No one comes in and saves you at 78. So I just say start now. And please, for free, go to onepagewealthcompass.com, download the free, no charge, there's no hidden thing there. Don't allow it for take a look at the one page and say, hey, maybe I have a 1 minute, I'm going to have a 2 minute meeting with myself every week, and I'm going to make sure I'm on the right path. So I don't wake up 20 years later like David did at 63 and be on a cliff, a financial cliff, ready to get pushed over. Because no one needs to face that in their senior years. There's nobody. I just felt like that
Amen.
was important to say.
I agree. So, David, thank you for being on the podcast today. I appreciate your story and your encouragement for men and families to work on building wealth and to prepare for their future. So, to the listening audience, I want to say thank you for the privilege of your time. Thank you for listening today. If you're in a season where work has fallen away and you're trying to find your footing again, hear this: your worth isn't tied to a job, and this moment doesn't define you. You can rebuild one honest step at a time. This is the Father's Refuge, a place for men finding hope after loss, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.